This is From Now On. I'm Lisa Phillips. Just a heads up, this episode contains discussions of coercion, sexual assault, stalking, and predatory behavior. Some may find it upsetting. We encourage you to take care of yourself. Welcome back to From Now On, the podcast where we dive into survivor stories that deserve to be heard, voices that deserve to be amplified, and issues that demand our attention. I'm your host, Lisa, and today's episode is one that weighs heavy on the heart, but is absolutely necessary to discuss. The United States, as we know it today, was built on the bloodshed, violence, and forced removal of the Indigenous people of this land. The violence that was inflicted upon Native communities just a few centuries ago was not just a tragic moment of history, it was the beginning of a cycle of oppression and harm that continues to this day. And its impact? It's generational. It lingers in policies, in systemic neglect, and in the everyday struggles of Indigenous people fighting for justice, safety, and recognition. One of the most pressing and devastating crises facing Native communities today is the epidemic of violence against Indigenous women and girls. This is not just a statistic, it's a lived reality. And today, we remember Emily Pike. Emily was a 14-year-old Native girl, a member of the San Carlos Apache tribe. Her life was stolen too soon. Her story is heartbreaking, and yet it is not an isolated one. It is part of a larger crisis that has been coined as MMIW, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, one that is deeply intertwined with intimate partner violence, dating violence, and sexual abuse within Native communities. The numbers are staggering. About 4 in 5 Native women have experienced violence. Indigenous women face murder rates that are 10 times higher than the national average. They experience sexual violence, trafficking, and domestic abuse at disproportionately high rates. And the worst part? These crimes often go uninvestigated and unpunished. The justice system has failed them time and time again. But this is not just about statistics. This is about real lives, real families, and real communities grieving their daughters, their sisters, their mothers. This is about the sacred land we stand on and the women who should feel safe upon it. Today, we have a powerful guest joining us, a strong Indigenous woman from the Native community who will share her perspective, her knowledge, and her fight for change. We will talk about the roots of the crisis, the barriers to justice, and most importantly, what can be done to protect Indigenous women and girls. Stay with us as we dive into the critical conversation. This is about awareness, accountability, and action. Because from now on, silence is not an option. Today's guest is a full-time artist, illustrator in San Diego, California. Her father is a member of the White Mountain Apache tribe, and her mother is a Mescalero Apache and a Coahuiltecan descent. Chiffon Lark is an Indigenous advocate for environmental sovereignty of the Native people and wildlife. Chiffon has worked with both non-Indigenous and Native-led organizations throughout the U.S. that are dedicated to cultural conservation and climate preservation. I am so grateful today to welcome Chiffon Lark to From Now On. Welcome, Chiffon.
Thank you for having me.
You are so welcome. So tell me, when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
You know, looking back, I've always wanted to be an artist. I'm very blessed in that from a very early age, I had clarity on those characteristics of who I was. And a clear vision of how I wanted to use that in the world that I live in. And it's always been to be an artist, my dream.
I love that. So tell me more about your art and your art practice.
Yeah, so I am a full-time artist and illustrator. I currently specialize in a contemporary medium known as alcohol ink. It's a non-water soluble fluid medium. A lot of people mistake it for watercolor, but I use an ethanol-based solution to dilute these highly concentrated pigments. I use a non-porous substrate so that there's a lot of movement. And I currently specialize in abstract realism as a wildlife portrait artist.
It's so exciting to know exactly what you want when you're young and make a career out of it, right?
I'm very blessed.
I was a little like that when I was younger too. It's like knowing exactly what I want and stuck with it, you know, for most of my career. So I'm just curious, where do you draw your inspiration from when you were younger? Were there other artists around you?
You know, I was not exposed to a lot of professional artists in my childhood. Art is inherently a part of our culture
Okay.
as Native people. It's how we preserve our stories, it's how we preserve our medicines, our ceremonies. We do it through art, through performance art, through visual art. And I think that was just inherently a part of who I was, even as a young girl. I had a very troubling upbringing, and books with illustrations became my one of my coping mechanisms.
Oh, okay. It's like an escape for you.
Absolutely. And seeing the artwork of a British artist by the name of Beatrice Potter. She's a very world-renowned watercolor artist. She actually specialized in wildlife portraiture herself and paired these illustrations with incredible stories. And you know, I saw her work as a young child, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my life.
I love that. So you're part of the Native community. What tribes are you a member of?
Yeah, so my father is from a White Mountain Apache tribe of northern Arizona. I'm Apache. I also represent my mother's people who come from New Mexico, Mescalero Apache tribe. And she also, her grandfather, my great grandfather, comes from an indigenous group of people from southern Texas
Oh, wow.
and the northern parts of what is now the northern state of Coahuila, which is Mexico.
Oh, that's fascinating. So, one of my goals of the podcast is to call out systems of oppression and institutions that profit from abuse. The United States was built on inflicting violence and genocide on the Native people of this land. And we know the acts of violence and genocide affect generations of people. Why do you want to tell your story today?
I think it's important that people recognize that the United States of America is not an old country. We are not even yet 250 years old. And for Native people, my community, my tribe specifically in the Southwest, we haven't really even been considered citizens for more than 100 years. And I think it's very important to remind people of the true delineation of United States history. And whether you reside in any part of the Americas, be that Canada, Central America, South America, we are on Indigenous land. We are on Native land. And I think that the struggles that we face as a community are not exclusive. I think that they are perpetuated throughout different socioeconomic demographics in the United States of America, specifically people of color. And I think it's very important for these communities to maintain an educated and informed awareness of their current surroundings.
So before we go further into your story, I want to acknowledge MMIW, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. It's a crisis which is deeply intertwined with intimate partner violence, dating violence, and sexual abuse. Recently, have been mourning the loss of Emily Pike, a 14-year-old. She's a Native girl who was a member of the San Carlos Apache tribe. When did you first come into awareness of this violence against Indigenous women?
I want to acknowledge what happened to Emily. When I learned about her discovery, you know, the San Carlos Apache tribe is our sister tribe. I have family lives there, relatives, part of that community. They're part of our community. We're all Apache people. We're all Native people. And it's devastating that young girl's potential as a woman never was realized.
Right.
And I feel that in many ways, her fate symbolizes what happens to all of us when we are touched by domestic violence, by abuse. Our potential is never really fully realized because our childhood ends there.
Right.
For those of us who have survived as minors, and for those women, even as, you know, survivors and as adults, your existence as you know it ceases completely.
A lot of people, a lot of people don't realize that. Like Emily's life was taken, but for those who go through sexual abuse, assault, domestic violence, it's like they're never the same.
No. And that is the path that we walk. That is the path that that has been written for us. And like I said, it's a horrible tragedy what has happened to her. And I also want to acknowledge all of the 5,500 women annually that this happens to in our communities.
5,500 a year in the United States.
In the United States and Canada.
Wow. And
those statistics don't include our relatives south of the U.S.-Mexican border.
Right.
They don't include the cases that occur in South America because these are Native people.
Right.
It's a reality that the United States government needs to reconcile and that we as citizens of this country need to reconcile. Because for that to be happening even today.
Oh, yeah. That's a shocking statistic. I also read it was 10 times the national average.
And those are just what's reported. You know, to circle back, you know, to your initial question about when I was first exposed to this type of violence.
Right.
As a Native woman, I was born into it.
So you were always aware of it growing up. The women talked about it, shared their experiences. It was an open thing.
I was first exposed to abuse and violence in my household. I watched my father abuse my mother. And I think it's important that people who see this conversation acknowledge that domestic violence and assault in a marriage was not even a considering factor for women who were going through it. It wasn't even legal until 1994 to press charges against your spouse for domestic violence, for assault. And so me having to see that occurring, a sequence of events, I was born into, I had a very, like I mentioned, troubling childhood. And so I was born into that awareness.
Yeah, so it's not just seeing that as a child, it's also knowing that your mother couldn't do anything about it.
And I think as a child, you know, cognitively you can't process that.
No.
But as a human being, we feel it.
Oh, for sure. You feel it. And you almost, like, a lot of people grow up thinking that's kind of what normal relationships are. Until you learn otherwise. Or a lot of times until you experience otherwise.
And even then, you know, I think it takes time, even when you are exposed to a healthy relationship or a healthy household, to really accept that, because your brain is associating those behaviors as normal.
Right, and that affects your self-worth.
And I think that in our communities, our Native communities, our people are conditioned to accept this abuse as normalcy. I don't blame my parents for what they did. They were doing the best they could with what they had. And, you know, as an adult, I learned that their parents, my grandparents, went through unspeakable abuses in the boarding schools in Oklahoma, in a Lutheran school my grandmother went to in Texas.
Is this off the Native community?
This is within the Native
Within,
community.
okay.
So my grandfather, my mother's father, and his siblings were assigned to a boarding school called Rainy Day Boarding School in Oklahoma. And so that's where the Kiowa, Comanche, Apache Reservation is in Oklahoma. And he spent a good portion of his childhood there. I learned that as an adult because my grandparents never spoke about these events. I don't think they ever really were provided with the resources to fully heal from it. And in turn, internalized it. You know, my parents had to experience that from both of their ends, you know. And so it was, looking back as, you know, as an adult now, it is no surprise that it was a part of my life too. Because it's been happening for so long.
Right. It just is a normal thing. Are you aware if it's changed in the boarding schools?
The boarding schools still exist. They operate as Indian schools, high schools, universities. You know, they've been reclaimed by the sovereign nations, respectively, of where they're located. You know, there are still unethical practices that occur. And it's decided within the states. So each state decides on what it constitutes as, you know, ethical. And, you know, so I can't speak to all Native people, all Native nations, all sovereign nations in the United States, and even in Canada. But those institutions 100% exist today.
Oh boy. I've been hearing a lot about boarding schools lately and the abuse that happens within them. Is it the same process if someone is being abused in a boarding school on Native land? They go to the regular police, or is there a police system within?
So first, I think we need to kind of backtrack to when these laws of the sovereign nations were kind of implemented, because it wasn't that long ago.
Right. You said in the 90s.
Well, that was, I think, for all women within the United States.
Okay.
But as far as the tribal nations having the right to even persecute a tribal member, that public law, it was Public Law 280, it didn't even pass until 1953. And that was very restrictive of the reservations of which the communities were.
Right.
So the crimes had to have been committed by a tribal member, but the persecution process couldn't even exceed 1 to 2 years in jail and like $5,000 in fines. That was like the max limit back then. And I think the American Indian Civil Rights Act was passed in 1968. So my parents were both already born. And that began to allow the states to determine what each tribe was able to do within their tribal community, their reserve. And that changed a lot, but it wasn't enough because tribal police were still unable to prosecute non-tribal members.
Okay.
And that is still the case today. It's still the case today. While there are stipulations, I think, that were written in different public law ordinances in 2010, so not that long ago, that allow each state to determine if whether or not the crime that was committed, if it was a non-tribal member that committed the crime, the federal government has the opportunity to get involved.
Okay.
But they consistently do not prioritize these cases. And it's a tragedy, and that's what the MMIW movement is about. It's about bringing awareness to the systems that are implemented in our communities that oppress our people and the criminals that continue to infiltrate through our community.
Mm-hmm. And who are the biggest perpetrators of the MMIW violence?
That's such a difficult question to answer because so many cases go unreported,
Mm-hmm.
and so much of that data is inconclusive. You know, I could say that with the statistics we do know,
Mm-hmm.
it is non-native people because they cannot be prosecuted on tribal land. However, I would go as far to say that the perpetrators of these crimes is everyone who either directly or indirectly contributes to the systems that are in place,
Mm-hmm.
that are voted through Congress.
Mm-hmm.
People who remain uneducated, who remain unwilling to see what the United States is doing, are the biggest perpetrators.
Mm-hmm. What type of safety measures were you taught or adapted to protect yourself from the violence and abuse growing up?
I wasn't taught anything.
No?
I was conditioned to accept it.
Were you taught to fear anyone outside of your community?
I wasn't taught to fear them consciously,
Mm-hmm.
but subconsciously, I was taught to submit to anyone outside of my community that was in a position of power.
Wow.
So when I, grew up in the city, I went to college in California,
Mm-hmm.
Southern California, I made a career for myself. And those corporate careers, those corporate education systems, even with private universities, those systems are not really set up to have our people succeed in.
Mm.
And so I think that a lot of what I was doing subconsciously was what I was conditioned to do, which is to submit
of course,
and to assimilate into the dominant culture.
Right. But the MMW is educating the Native women so doesn't happen anymore. Or so they feel more empowered to stand up for themselves, or like not to fear the outside as much or submit to.
So MMIW, it stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a second part to that I like to include, which is Missing and Murdered Indigenous People.
Okay.
Because I also want to acknowledge that this doesn't just happen to women.
Mm-hmm.
In 2023, Cole Brings Plenty was murdered and found dead in Lawrence, Kansas.
Mm.
A young man, in his early 20s. He went to the Haskell Indian Nations University. And
violence from someone outside of the community.
That's what the reports are very inconclusive as to, what exactly occurred.
Mm-hmm.
But there are witnesses that had seen non-Native people and this young man who is a member of the Native community having confrontation prior to his death.
So acts of prejudice or racism?
It's a very complex matter because I think that a lot of people who are outside of the community, they don't realize that their behavior can be either implicitly or explicitly biased.
Mm-hmm.
Whether we want to label that as racism, whether we want to label that as sexism, there is a bias.
Right.
It's implicit. It's subconscious. And oftentimes I think a lot of people aren't aware of it. And, I cannot speak to what happened to, that young man in Lawrence, Kansas, but I want to acknowledge that this violence in our community, it's not just women.
Well, I like to acknowledge that too. for this podcast, always want to say it's not just about women. It's people as a whole.
People.
And abuse against humanity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I learned from you that there is a robust Native community in San Diego. Can you tell me how often do you interact with your tribe, tribal affiliations, and the greater community?
So, like I mentioned, my tribe is in northern Arizona, but I live in San Diego, California. I went to San Diego State University for college and have built a business for myself in San Diego. It's a beautiful city. It's Kumeyaay land. The four tribes that reside within the San Diego County are the Cupeño, the Cahuilla, the Kumeyaay, and the Lusueño. And so San Diego is unique in that it has the most reservations per capita in a county in the United States. So currently there are 18 reservations in San Diego County alone, which is the largest number of Native American communities in a county. Now, San Diego is a big city.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that.
It's a beautiful Native community. I've really enjoyed being a part of it. And yes, there are Apache tribal members that live in San Diego as well. I have relatives, within the county lines, and it's a monthly occurrence, to interact and to be a part of the community events.
What kind of events or gatherings do you participate in?
All different kinds, from conversations with universities, educational conferences for tribal associations, and to ceremonies, to art events, native art events.
Yeah.
We also do public events that are known as powwows, and so those traditions came from the tribes in the Midwest. And we've adopted them throughout the United States and also throughout Canada.
Is that for anyone to join?
Yeah, they're open to the
that's great.
public.
Okay. That's awesome. So in 2023, you were hired as a photographer for the American Indian Health Center to document a powwow happening. Can you tell me about what happened throughout the first day of the powwow?
Yes, so each powwow is typically sponsored by, institutions in our community, whether it's a casino from a specific tribe, educational institution like a university. Every year in San Diego, the American Indian Health Center sponsors a powwow in spring. And, I love photography. I love videography, and I was there as a photographer for the event. And it was it's a good powwow. It's some of these gatherings can be small, some of them can be really big. This one was a really good size. There was a lot of people that came.
That you knew, friends, family?
Yeah,
Okay.
people that I knew. We have a lot of the vendors, they come from out of state. They come from different reservations. We have a lot of people who, they do arts and cultural jewelry and cultural pottery, and it's part of who we are as a people. And so we gather different communities throughout the United States, and so the powwows, they're open for everyone. And I was there, taking pictures. The San Diego Tribune, which is a news media source in San Diego, was there as well. So I was shooting alongside with them, the grand entry of the powwow, which is when, you get a lot of really beautiful photographs, beautiful videos of our dancers, our chairmen, our chairwomen, the veterans. There's something that occurs in the beginning of the powwow, which is known as the grand entry.
Okay.
And so the grand entry is before the dance competitions commence. They have all of the dancers come in and dance together. And that's to show that even though there is competition, we are all a community. We're all together. And so we have, different flag bearers that come and they bring in, the tribal nations flags, the state flags, the United States flag. And typically they'll have a member of the, veteran community, Native veteran community, come and bear the United States flag. And so I noticed that there was a younger appearing man carrying the American flag, and I noticed the way that he was carrying it. It wasn't really something that I had seen before. He seemed, and I had never seen this man before either.
Right.
I mean, granted, you meet new people at each powwow, each gathering because of the openness.
Right.
And so I, continued to photograph the grand entry. And after, that same person who, had been behaving kind of, it was a very interesting dynamic in contrast to the elders who were bearing the other flags.
Okay.
And
he was holding it in like a disrespectful way?
Not necessarily a disrespectful way. It was more of, usually when you are asked to bear a flag, it's an honor.
Right.
You're serving as a leader, be it temporary or consistent within your community to represent what you are bearing.
Sure, you have to hold it with pride.
Absolutely. And so usually, from my experience growing up in this community, there's a reverence that is maintained in the person that is asked to hold the flag. And I think this person stood out to me because I didn't see that reverence presenting itself in the way I had seen it before.
Okay.
It was a very minor detail because there's a lot of dancers, there's a lot of people there that, want to have their picture taken. But when that man asked me to take his picture after the grand entry was over, I remembered, okay, this is, somebody who isn't dressed traditionally. There was definitely a disparity there. And so he did, approach me after the grand entry to ask for a photo.
Okay. Do you think he was just trying to get your attention?
It definitely, looking back in retrospect, I believe so. I believe so. I believe this person saw me before I saw them. And that behavior was consistent of, I want you to see me. How do I get your attention? He had to ask me, approach me for a photo, of him carrying the American flag with a young woman coming to, they were posing together with the flag. And, I didn't think anything of it. I'm there as a photographer. So of course, take the picture. But it was after that picture was taken, he approached me again. I'm making my way back into, the dance competitions. We have the grass dancers coming in. I want to get photographs of, all of our dancers. And he, comes up to me real quick and says, hey, can you send me that picture? And I'm like, well, yeah, they'll be available. I'll send them to this, website. You can contact, someone there. He goes, well, could you send it to me sooner? I'd like to share this with somebody. Something to that effect. That kind of, insisted. It was very insistent. And so I said, okay, yeah, you can have my email. I don't have any cards on me, but you can have my email and I'll send you the edit when it's ready. And he said, okay, why don't you just put your phone number in my phone and I'll text you so you can text me your email.
Yeah.
And it's like, at this point, I hear the drums starting and the dance competition for the first category is beginning. And so I say, okay, let me just get this over with. I'll give you my phone number. Here you go. And looking back,
Yeah, he was
I
just trying to get the number.
I see how this was very strategic,
Yeah, for sure.
you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
because you could have just easily emailed him later,
right,
but he didn't care about the picture. He wanted your number.
right,
Yeah.
right. Well,
Mhm.
looking back in
Looking back,
retrospect,
yeah, of course, you're not going to think about that in the moment.
when, any media specialist or professional will, probably agree in that when we're on site at an event,
Yeah.
we're doing our very best to capture each
Mhm.
moment.
Mm-hmm.
And with life, we experience so many moments at once. So our attention has to be um, divided evenly in
Right.
order for us to deliver a
Mm-hmm.
quality product,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's photographs or video.
Yeah.
And so, in that moment, I realized that that was a very strategic
Mm-hmm.
approach,
Mm-hmm.
because there must have been something about my behavior that
Mm-hmm.
he noticed,
Mm-hmm.
and he realized that, he could do that, you know, because it's one thing to say, "Oh, I'll find you when you're on break,"
Right.
or "Here's my card, why don't
Right.
you email
Or even
me?"
just ask you for your number. He probably knew you were going to say no. So,
I was put in a position,
mm-hmm.
and it was very strategic. I'm thinking of a study that was done in, I think it was NYU. They recorded people on the street for, I think, 24 hours. And
Mm-hmm.
they showed it to convicted criminals. They said, who out of these people would you pick?
Mm-hmm.
And they all picked the same
Same.
person.
Mm-hmm.
They all picked the same people in each segment that was shown
Mm-hmm.
to the groups. And I believe that's how these people operate as well.
Yeah, they all picked the meek, vulnerable looking one. I remember like reading that same study, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was like rapists and all sorts of people have convicted of horrible crimes and things. They all picked the same person. Yeah, the vulnerable looking one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Like, you're thinking you're just giving him your number so you can exchange the picture. But he's thinking 10 steps ahead of you.
In retrospect, I realized that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't mean to make light of the situation, because it is very serious.
So what happens later? He has your number now.
So I had a shoot after the powwow.
Okay.
I had to film a private event in La Jolla, which is a community just a little bit north of where I was at the powwow.
Mm-hmm.
The powwow had occurred. It was in downtown San Diego at Balboa
Right.
Park. And La Jolla is about a 20-minute drive north.
Mm-hmm. Gorgeous area.
It's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a private concert that hired me as a videographer. So I had to, leave right at 5 o'clock, which was before the powwow ended. But I had to make my way up to the second shoot. And
Okay.
while I was doing a audio visual, check, we were making sure all the mics were working, everything was set up. You're familiar.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I get this call, and my phone starts buzzing, and I'm like, okay, everything is good here. We got about 10 minutes till everything begins. I step
Right.
outside, I take the call, and I see that it's this guy.
Mm-hmm.
I answer it, and it was just like a very odd interaction. It was a very odd interaction, because I had just met
Yeah.
that person.
Yeah, a couple hours earlier.
The pictures aren't going to be ready.
No, no.
And I realized that, when I answered, I was just like, hey, the pictures aren't going to be ready until, can you give me like a week?
Right. Mm-hmm.
He was like, oh yeah, I'm not calling about that.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to let you know that I looked you up
What?
through your phone number, because I think with your phone number,
Yeah.
you can type it in
Mm-hmm.
to social media platforms and locate
Mm-hmm.
individuals. And that's a whole other separate issue, is the cybersecurity measures that
Mm-hmm.
people are
Yeah,
uh,
aren't aware of. Yeah.
aren't
Mm-hmm.
aware of.
We have to do a little bit of digging. It's not super easy, but yeah.
you know, and it, you know, he happened to find that I was an artist. He said, you know, I wanted to ask you if you'd be interested in meeting a good friend of mine. She's a gallery owner in San Diego, and she features Native artists.
Mm.
And I was like, well, I'd love to meet her.
Yeah.
But listen, I gotta go. He
Right.
said, there's one other thing that I noticed about you.
Mm.
And I thought, oh, this is interesting. And he said, you seem like you have, the term he used, it's like this overly saturated new age term. I hear it.
Right.
It's called, he said, you have shadow work to
Uh-huh.
do. And I want to let you know that I specialize in helping people with that.
Wow.
And immediately I said, you know what? Thank you so much. I will let you know when the pictures are ready. Have a good night.
Because something didn't feel right about that. And did you know what shadow work is?
I've been exposed to the term, and
can you explain what it is for the audience?
Well, not necessarily, because it's not a term that we use as Native people.
No, but you knew something was off with it.
How I've heard it used in the community of which I feel it derives from, which is a new age community, right? I believe that the definition consists of, you know, having unresolved pain or unresolved trauma. And, you know, whether that is true or not, that's in our community, traditionally, that's not somebody's place to say.
No.
In order to even be an individual that is respected, that can even discern whether that's true or not, it's not approached. It's not approached in that way. And so, to me, that was offensive. As a Native woman, that was offensive, and I felt, as a member of the community, this man should know that. But as I hung up the phone, I heard a voice in my head say, just because, you know, this person is Native doesn't mean that they understand.
Oh, he was Native.
Well, at the time I thought.
Okay.
So that was my impression. You know, here's somebody who's been appointed as a flag carrier in a grand entry at a powwow, who was wearing, you know, 2 feathers in their ponytail sticking up. And I thought, you know, well, he's not very traditional, but, you know, he seems to be a member of the community. And so
so that gives you another level of trust.
It did at first.
That makes sense.
It did at first. I think because this was years ago, I still had to learn that just because these people are part of the community, whether they're of Native descent or non-Native descent, it doesn't mean that they understand what is within my well-being. It doesn't mean that they have my best interests at heart. And so I think back then I did feel that, you know, this person was trustworthy to a degree until that conversation happened. And I remember going to bed that night after the shoot and praying about it. And I remember just feeling like that was just really uncomfortable. And I was like very offended by that.
Sure. Well, in retrospect, were you thinking that he was testing your boundaries?
You know, that concept got brought up to me very recently. And in retrospect, that is 100% what this individual was doing. And there is not a doubt in my mind that their behavior was consistent of, how can I bring this person down to make her more vulnerable for me to, whether I entice her of coming to me. You know, predators have different tactics.
Oh yeah, totally different tactics. But he used 2 different ones. The first one was to make you feel good that he could introduce you to someone who could help your career. So he brought you up. And the other one was like, but you have some work to do. So I can help you with that. And to meet up with him for that reason, you'd probably be alone. You know?
Exactly.
Yeah. So he's trying 2 different ways.
Exactly.
Yeah. So he's actually coming on pretty strong.
It was very persistent, and in retrospect, I see it was happening even before I knew this person existed. From acting, maintaining strange behaviors in the grand entry to approaching me for a photo, it was very strategic.
Yeah, and you read it first. You saw it first. There was something about him you didn't even like from the start.
And I think that at that time in my life, I wanted to believe that there was good in people.
And of course, yeah.
And my initial, after that call, the next day I had to return to the powwow because some powwows are more than one day. They're the whole weekend. And so
Oh, so you knew you'd probably have to see him again.
I didn't actually. I didn't know that. But I was there, I continued to facilitate the media, the photography, videography. And then
how does he convince you to continue to communicate with him?
That's a good question. As I was leaving that evening on Sunday, this man is coming in from the parking lot. So I'm walking towards the parking lot, and I think I stopped at a vendor's table to say hello, and then I was wearing some beaded jewelry, and we start talking about the jewelry and just very friendly community conversation. And this individual and this vendor's booth is by the parking lot, so I'm kind of on my way out. And this is after the conversation where I had bad vibes from this individual, and he approaches me again as I'm leaving the next day. And I'm just like, oh, at this point, I don't even want to engage with this person. I'll be polite, of course. And, so, I didn't look at him or, make conversation. I think I was, speaking to the vendor, and I was saying goodbye. Well, it was nice to see you. And then this person comes up on behind me on my other side, shakes the vendor's hand. Oh, hey, how you doing? Good to see you. And I'm just like, okay. So I'm making my way to leave. And he goes, I see you, Chiffon. And I was like, how are you? It's like, nice to see you, saving face as a professional.
Yeah.
And even looking back, that was very strategic. And I was like, okay, goodbye. Have a great evening, everyone.
Right.
And, saw my exit, and he goes, listen, I want to apologize to you. I spoke to you very disrespectfully last night when I called you, and I want to apologize. And I'm like, that's a very uncommon behavior for a man to do, in my experience, unfortunately. So I was like, okay, I'm listening. He goes, I want you to know that I've been under a lot of stress, some personal things in my life, and I should have never spoken to you that way. There's no excuse for that. I do still want to, put the offer on the table of introducing you to my good friend. If you're available tonight, there's an event happening at her gallery. I'd love to introduce you. And I said, well, okay. He's owning up to the disrespect, and, okay, he seemed like he had the trust of people in the community. And so I said, okay, let me, what he said, I have a couple things to do here, but can I call you or text you later tonight and we can meet up?
Okay.
And I said, absolutely. And what's even more bizarre about this is that when he said, where do you live? And I said, I live in downtown, which isn't far from where we were. He said, oh, I live there too. So I can just
scoop you up.
Yeah. like it was like, so like, and I thought, okay. Yeah. Let me know.
Okay.
I'll be available.
Right.
He said, okay. So say around 7 p.m.
Okay.
I think it was about 5 at that point. I said, sounds good.
Well, you're feeling comfortable at this point. You apologize for something you were feeling the day before that felt a little off.
Felt very off.
So that all makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was, that was how this person was able to come back in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay.
But
I
you
was
weren't aware that maybe that was manipulative.
not at that
Not
time.
at the time. I wouldn't have thought so either.
Not at that time, you
Because
know.
that can be genuine. That's a genuine person right there. Yeah,
Absolutely.
we don't know what's going to happen later.
Absolutely. And, you know, at that point in my life, I hadn't dated in over 3 years. And I was, you know, I was very much open to the
Yeah.
idea of having companionship.
Mm-hmm. So how was it? How was the first date?
Well, I remember him saying specifically that he was going to call me or text me and that we would plan to connect around 7 p.m.
Okay.
Be that I meet him on site where he was planning to take me,
Mm-hmm.
or if he was going to, we were going to coordinate, you know, otherwise. And you know, it was almost 8 o'clock and I
Gosh.
hadn't heard from him. So I was like, I'm getting ready to
Red flag.
to call this, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I've got a lot of work to do as a business owner. I'm not interested in waiting around.
Yeah, because he had mentioned 7 o'clock.
He had
Yeah,
specifically
okay.
said, I will call you or text you at 7,
Mhm.
around 7 o'clock.
Okay.
So it's about 7:45 p.m. So
And
I
you
think
were like dressed and ready to go.
I was waiting.
Yeah, of course.
I
Okay.
was waiting. I thought, you know, this man wants to take me on a proper date. Then at this point, I was like, well, maybe we'll get some food or, you know,
Right.
so should I eat dinner? Should I not,
Mhm.
you know, and I'm kind of
Yeah.
being mindful of that, those plans. And I just thought, you know, that's it. I'm calling it a
Okay.
night. And then I hear from him. It's about 8 p.m., 8:10.
Right.
He said, listen, I want to apologize. I'm running behind.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you know, it's okay. Let's
Right.
reschedule. He
Mhm.
said, nope, I want to see you.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, okay, again, another unusual
Yeah.
behavior for
Yeah.
a man to be
Mm-hmm.
so communicative
Yeah.
about his desire to see me.
Yeah, but that also makes sense.
And it was feeding that
Yeah.
lonely part
Yeah.
of me.
For sure. And you were already dressed and ready to go, so.
And then I'm like, okay, you know, we'll go ahead and give this
Yeah.
this a shot. So we plan to meet halfway between where we both lived, because I think he was a couple blocks over. And again, very, very strange that, you know, his location was so close. And
Mm-hmm.
I met him. I think he picked me up a few blocks from my apartment. I had asked, you know, can we meet there? He said,
Good.
well, let me meet you here. I'll pick you up, because I actually didn't know where the gallery was exactly. I had
Right.
never been there before.
Mm-hmm.
I had never met the gallery owner before. I had heard of them, but we ended up connecting. At this point, it's almost 9 o'clock.
Wow.
And, you know, I'm sure the gallery's closing soon.
Right.
And, you know, we make it to the gallery. He makes the introduction,
Oh,
which
good.
went really well. It's a
Good.
beautiful, beautiful curated collection there. You know, had a great conversation with the owner, with
Mm-hmm.
some of the staff members there, and it was actually not far from where I lived.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, you know, well, you know, this is very nice. He said, can I walk you home? Can I, you know, are you walking? You want me to drive you? I said, I can walk. It's okay.
Right.
You know, and he walked me home and he said, you know, I had a really great time with you and I'd love to see you again.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well,
So charming.
there's no can I come up? There's no can
That's
I
good.
kiss you? Can I, you know, it was very respectful
Mm-hmm.
perceivably. And
Yeah.
I was like, wow, okay, that was a big turn. So I said, yeah, you know, I'm open to it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, text me and we'll stay in touch.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, thank you so much. You know, what a great evening.
Yeah.
And I remember before I went to bed, I, you know, showered and got ready for bed. He had sent me a text message saying, I really can't stop thinking of how wonderful of a night and your beautiful eyes or something like that.
Oh,
Very like just laying it on thick. And I'm like,
the love bombs. How did that strike you?
I mean, I was welcoming it at this point. He had already regained my trust
Mm-hmm.
from.
So there's something about him that you liked, and he was attractive. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
And I remember, you know, that night I prayed about it, and I remember, you know, experiencing the confirmation that there is an attraction here.
Yeah.
whether I'm consciously admitting it or not, I am attracted to this person. And it was a confirmation they're 100% attracted to me. So if I continue to build a relationship, know that it's not going to be professional, that he's trying to pursue me romantically.
Right.
So if I continue to see him, that's the intention. And I have to acknowledge that.
Right.
But the closing statement of the experience that evening for me during prayer was, you're always in control. So I was like, okay.
Yeah.
I felt that made me feel a little bit safer.
Yeah.
So,
and that does make you feel safe. He didn't ask to come up, and he wasn't trying to kiss you on the first date. That always makes you feel a little safer as a woman.
it was very respectful. I think a lot of more often than not, and I can't say this for just men, because I'm sure there are women too. They expect that physical intimacy from the beginning.
Yeah.
And I've been exposed to that. I've had that experience so many times.
So many times, I know. And it's too much, too quick. Yeah, usually.
And it's violating.
Yeah, but also it can be a strategy to make you feel at ease and comfortable and safe with him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so in retrospect, I see how this was all very strategic. And I met up with him, we had dinner.
Okay.
We had a couple more dates, and it wasn't until I think maybe our second or third date that we actually kissed. So it was like I felt very comfortable, because this is the speed I typically move at, is even sometimes slower than that.
Right. So things were lining up.
And I felt like, okay, here's somebody who's willing to respect my my boundaries. Here's somebody who's, and during those dates, I want to just emphasize, this man was portraying himself as a leader in the Native community. I think at some points he had even like referred to himself as a healer or some medicine man.
Yeah.
And that his tribal affiliation was that of the Cherokee Nation.
Okay.
And
and all that made sense to you.
At the time, I was taking it at face value.
Right. When did you finally ask him about it? Specifically about his community and tribal affiliation?
I think it was when I told him I had been invited to be a part of a large Indigenous gathering, which was open to the public, but it was highlighting Indigenous wisdom. And so I had relatives and fellow, people from my tribe that were attending. And because I do ceremonial, I do social dancing in our way, they asked if I would be a part of it. And so it was all kind of already in place before I had met this man. But I mentioned, I am going to be attending this, with my people. We're going to be going to this location. And then he kind of was like all about it. Okay. But the way that he expressed himself as advocating for it, it didn't really line up consistently with other people from my community that I told about this. Because in order for me to attend something like this, traditionally, I have to have the elders' blessing in our community. They are the wisdom keepers of our community. So I have to seek guidance from my elders first before I can even feel comfortable as a woman, as a Native woman, as a member of the community, to be doing this in a non-Native space. Okay. And so, but the way that he expressed himself, it just kind of didn't line up. And I thought, well, maybe because he's from a different tribe. So I asked him, I said, what is your tribe's tradition around bringing do you have dances? Do you have prayers or songs, or, what do your people do? Because we're not all the same. Right. That's another thing I want to highlight, is that the sovereign nations within the United States and Canada, and even in Central South America, each community is different. Okay. We have different languages, different dialects, different prayers, different songs, different dances, different regalia, different colors. And while there is a lot of overlap within our people, we're very different. Okay, so this is a very loaded question you're asking him. And at that point, my intuition was saying, something's not adding up
Well,
here.
what did he say?
If I can recall correctly, it was just something about, it was just, it was, I think it was an accumulation of a lot of things
Okay.
about how he learned archery as a young boy.
Did it make sense?
It didn't.
No,
It
did okay.
didn't. Because I mean, granted, there are community. Our community teaches traditional ways.
Mm-hmm.
And that's common. But then I asked him about the reservation community, and first he had mentioned Cherokee, North Carolina.
Okay.
So I know.
So he's from a
members-
different state.
Well, claiming to be.
Okay.
So I said, so did you grow up on the res? You got family on the res? He couldn't really answer that, but then it came up again. And I said, well, so tribally,
Right.
you said that you're Cherokee. And he said, well, I'm East Band Cherokee. And I
Okay.
said, okay, East Band Cherokee is different because those people were displaced.
Okay.
And just for clarification too, reservations are former prisoner of war camps.
Okay.
So that people who are listening to this conversation understand that
Right.
there are a lot of communities and bands and tribes that have been displaced from their ancestral land because of genocide and
Okay.
because of war and because of forced removal. So tragically, we understand the Trail of Tears, and the Cherokee Nation was displaced and put in a prisoner of war camp in Oklahoma.
Okay.
So I know that that's what they constitute the Eastern Band. So I said, I thought you said you were from North Carolina, which is where the Cherokee Nation is. And then he said he was East Band. And I said, well, that's in Oklahoma, right?
Wow.
And he was like, well, kind of flip-flopping. And I said, okay, it was like, so are you are you interested? Because he expressed interest in coming with me to this gathering. I said, so are you coming as a representative of your tribe?
Right.
And he said, well, yeah, I mean, if I'm coming here to support you. And I said, okay, because I don't know this organization very well, and I don't think they have any more space or room to kind of, because he had expressed like he wanted to be active in part of the agenda. And I said, well, I'm going with elders from my community.
Right.
And I'm coming because they asked me to be a part of it, to share our culture. And I don't think that they have, I don't have any knowledge of how to get you a place in this event. And so he said, well, then I'll just come and support you.
Okay.
And it was just all.
And is that okay?
Accumulation. Well, it is okay. Absolutely. But I think what really didn't sit well with me was his first reaction was he wanted to be a part of the speaking event.
Right.
And I was like, well,
but couldn't define which one he was going to be representing,
if any at all. But I think people who are so like motivated to put themselves in the spotlight in a certain way, I've noticed they have it's not something that I'm looking for in a long-term partner. And so I just kind of was exploring that a little bit more.
Did he just think he was going to fool people?
I mean, fast forward, and he came with us to the event, and he did.
Yeah.
And he did. And he had me, my relatives, other Apache tribal members, because he came with me. I vouched for this man.
Right. Yeah.
I remember, specifically, introducing him to some of these elders. They questioned. They said, Chiffon, are you sure you want to bring this person with you to this? And I said, well, yeah, I really like him. I think I'm like having feelings for him. I think he could be a good partner for me.
Yeah.
He seems, and this was just, we were moving so quickly,
right?
And the love bombing and the portrayal of him being this traditional native man with this wisdom.
Yeah.
I was like, well, I think maybe we could be a good match.
Yeah. It seems like he was mirroring everything that he thought that you wanted.
It's a really good point. I didn't think of that. I didn't even think of that. But I do know that he used me to vouch for him in a space in front of extremely well-respected leaders in our community. I think that it was a tragedy, you know.
What happened at the gathering?
Because I was so supportive of this person.
Yeah.
I was almost like working overtime to convince the elders and the community members that were questioning him that he was a good person. And, you know, I performed, you know, we have social dances in our community. So, you know, relative tribal member, you know, the Apache tribe was there with a drum, and you know, I performed for this group of people. It's a large number of people.
You did a dance? Oh, nice.
Yeah. So it was, you know, it was very respectful. You know, they closed that opening ceremony that I was a part of, and you know, he was so happy, you know, to be there. He was trying to stand next to me. I was invited to be a part of the prayer, you know, with a lot of the leaders, and he was right there like Velcro with me, you know, just you know, trying to be a part of it too. And he was saying, you know, I just want to be there to support you. You're so incredible and you're so amazing. And, you know, just really feeding that, you know, really lonely part of me that needed that validation. And so I said, you know, I want to, you know, thank you for being here. And this gathering takes place in a really rural area. And we had tents to sleep in. And so because this man was coming as, you know, the person I was seeing at the time, we shared a tent. And
it was an overnight gathering.
It was overnight. And you know, this setting was, it was, you know, it was very rustic, and I'm okay with that. That's I was raised in that, so I was good with that. But I just remember after that opening ceremony, you know, I didn't want to wear my regalia outside of that dance, that prayer. And so I was like, you know, I'm going to go and change, head back to the tent. He said, I'll walk you. And the camping space is a little bit separate at this specific event than like the main stage area. So, you know,
well, explain the regalia.
So regalia is, these are traditional clothes that Native people wear. And so often it is indicative of what our ancestors wore pre-contact. So that's very, very sacred to us as Native people. And oftentimes will consist of, you know, hide. In our community, it's buckskin, you know, or elk hide. Other tribes, they have, you know, buffalo hide, or you know, moose hide, or you know, there's different stories of the beadwork integrated into the regalia, you know, different colors that are indicative of different medicines in our culture. So the regalia is something that you wear to breathe life into your ancestral ways.
So it's very spiritual.
It is.
Yeah, it sounds very beautiful.
For me, I respect those ways. And the way I was raised is you don't wear those clothes outside of ceremony. You don't wear those clothes outside of prayer. And you know, you don't bring your feathers out and outside of this. So one of the main red flags about this person was that they always wore feathers. And I remember feeling uncomfortable with that at times. Like, you know, in our ways, you don't wear feathers. You don't bring out your feathers, whether you've earned them or not. Outside of ceremony, outside of prayer, you know. And for me, I was like, you know, why is he wearing this? It almost seemed like it was to draw attention to him. And it's very not traditional. So, you know,
maybe he didn't know that.
I kind of figured, you know, but then as I started to ask him those things throughout the time of our relationship, um, you know, he seemed very aware
Okay.
of the significance, especially when I
Mm-hmm.
took those moments like, well, maybe he doesn't know. Maybe I need
Right.
to educate him at least in our ways,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because every tribe is
Yeah.
different. And, you know, I want to respect everyone's ways, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so
But that's not a rule that most people break, right? So it was like out of the norm.
it's very out of the norm in my community. I
Mm-hmm.
can't speak for other communities, but I know that that's not very
Yeah.
common practice.
It could be a thing of like, I want to do what I want to do. Attitude.
Yeah, and so, you know, that was also a big red flag
Okay.
looking back.
Looking back though,
Mm-hmm.
but at the time you just thought he has a lot of pride and, you know, himself and his tribe.
Those were the stories he was saying, but
Yeah.
again, my intuition was like, there's something not lining up
Mm-hmm.
here. That was definitely a conversation we had a few times
Right.
about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but every time you brought it up, he would just like make you feel good about everything and have a bunch of stories to cover up everything.
Yeah, that or dismiss my question
Oh, dismissive.
and kind of be like, well, you know, you have your ways and I have my
Oh,
ways, you know,
so that's a
type
little
of thing.
disrespectful.
I was also, he knew that I was a very respectful
Mm-hmm.
person and that I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't going to insist that you know, our ways are the only ways. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I just would express, you know, and this is
Right.
this is how I see it.
Right. Okay. Then what happened?
So we performed the dance. You know, we needed to change, you know, before the next series of events, or I had chosen to change because of how I view my regalia, and decided to go back to the tent.
Okay.
And you know, this individual came with me. You know, he's like, I'll walk you there.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I hadn't even opened my suitcase where my other skirts and my other clothes were,
Mm-hmm.
outside of my traditional clothes, you know, my regalia. And um, I started to feel him coming up behind me. And I remember he kind of put his weight on me so that I was like, I couldn't really get my clothes out of the bag, but I was also in the corner of a tent where there was like
Mm-hmm.
no way for me to kind of maneuver. And I just remember him putting his hand up my dress,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, I'm wearing my full
Mm-hmm.
regalia still. I think I still had my eagle feathers in my hand, and I just was like, whoa, hold on. Let's not do
Mm-hmm.
that with this. Let
Mm-hmm.
me change, you
Mm-hmm.
know, or, you know,
Right.
and he said, you know, he didn't actually say anything. Actually, now that I'm thinking, he had like this really like animalistic look on his face. And he put his whole, at that point, I had turned around trying to kind of like, because I'm on my hands and knees, we're in a little tent. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, so I had turned around, and I remember he put his whole weight on me. So I was on my back.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, he wants to have intercourse.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, you know, with everything on.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt in that moment as it was happening, he's fetishizing.
Mm-hmm.
He's objectifying me
Mm-hmm.
right now in this context.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like very uncomfortable, humiliated, and all these things going on in the moment. But that conditioning that I had, you know, discussed in the beginning of our conversation was just let these people do what they need to do. Just submit. That was how I responded to this.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, looking back, it was disgusting. And I was so in shock that he did something like that, um, that I just swept it under the rug.
Mm-hmm.
And I just continued about the weekend,
Mm-hmm.
because this was in the beginning, this was the first day of the whole weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a grandfather from southern Arizona, um, who's a ceremonialist. He's part of the Native American church. He was there at that gathering, and I remember him checking on me in the middle of the night that night.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, looking back, he knew something happened
Oh,
to
really?
me. He knew it. And I continued to, oh, everything's good,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I'm good. I'm all right.
He probably saw the shift in your energy.
It was very uncomfortable when it happened, but I think I've been conditioned my whole life to suppress that
Yeah.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
discomfort. And that's what I did.
Mm-hmm.
And
We are conditioned that way.
mhm,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely, absolutely. Um, and this person probably knew that
Mm-hmm.
at this point, after, you know, a month of dating,
Mm-hmm.
he had figured out that I was that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that if we were in this setting, he could get away with it.
Yeah, because it's such a strange setting to do something like that, to take that risk.
I can't explain it.
Yeah.
I can't wrap my head around why people do those things.
Mm-hmm.
But they happen a lot more
Mm-hmm.
than we're willing to talk about as
Mm-hmm.
a society. And I hate to say this, but even my own community has refused for generations to talk about these
Mm-hmm.
heinous acts.
Mm-hmm.
My own parents, my own grandparents, my
Mm-hmm.
great grandparents.
Yeah, the most violating acts. Yeah.
We've been conditioned to accept and suppress and
Mm-hmm.
repress these experiences
Mm-hmm.
as women, as Native people.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, this person did what he did. And I went on about
Mm-hmm.
my weekend because this person was my means of transportation.
Mm-hmm.
And I remembered too, you know, another Apache tribal member who was there at that gathering before we left. He's, you know, him and his wife offered, you know, because they lived in the same vicinity, very close to San Diego. You know, they said, do you need a ride back?
Do you think they sensed something as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah. They were looking
Absolutely.
out for you.
And I was just, nope, I got this.
Mm-hmm.
I got this.
Is that because you were scared of him?
Maybe subconsciously, but
Mm-hmm.
consciously, I was scared to face the reality of what I had gotten myself into.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that age of where I was in my life, I never expected to be experiencing something like
Right.
that,
Mm-hmm.
to be involved with someone like that.
Mm-hmm. And you were saying, I do the same thing. It's something I got myself into it, you know, but that wasn't your fault. That was his whole manipulation and strategy from the start. What happened once you got back home? Did you try and end things with him, or did you continue?
Well, I think what happened after that was his car, I guess from the trip, because it was a commute, he had to
Right.
drive hundreds of miles, and the terrain was pretty rugged, and I don't think the vehicle he was driving at the time was
Mm-hmm.
equipped to deal with those types of conditions.
Okay.
So he had approached me and had let me know that his car needed to be serviced and that
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't running, and it was, you know, more than likely due to our trip and him, you know, transporting me to and from that gathering. And so I said, well, what can I do? You know, how can I help you? And he said, well, it's going to be quite a bit. And even after I get it out of the shop, my building where I live doesn't have parking. So, um, you know, I don't know what I'm going to do
Mm-hmm.
at this point. And I was like, well, you know, my building has parking.
Right.
Once you get it out of the shop,
Mm-hmm.
if you need to, you know, if they need to order the parts and you need a place to store it, because I think they charge like
Mm-hmm.
a storage fee there at the shop.
Right.
I said, you can park it in my building because we have parking and I don't own a vehicle.
Right.
But we do have to pay. They charge us for the duration of our lease.
Mm-hmm.
So it
Mm-hmm.
was close to $3,000
Mm-hmm.
I had to pay.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, if I'm, if you need it, I'll help you.
Right.
And he said, I'll pay you back. And I said, okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
that's helpful to know. And at
Mhm.
this point, I thought, he was in between jobs and that he was a
Right.
very, professional person. Like,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
again, we had only been on a few dates, and then I
Right.
just had this experience with him where
Yeah.
it was so confusing.
Mm-hmm.
It was so confusing because he did that at the very beginning, but then for the rest of the weekend,
Everything was normal.
he would publicly show people around that he was like so honored to be with
Right.
me.
Oh gosh, that is confusing.
It was so confusing
So it was
because
very normal and loving after
he was overdoing it,
overdoing it. Mm-hmm.
at certain points. And I felt like very, very, very confused.
But it's confusing because in your mind it's almost like, oh, maybe it wasn't so bad, and you start to convince yourself.
I started to go back to what this person had kind of built himself up to be before we arrived on site, that
Mm-hmm.
event, because that would allow me to be relinquished of the responsibility of getting myself involved with a dangerous man.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I was operating because I was so afraid to face the fact that I was vouching for this person.
Mm-hmm.
I brought him into my community.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point where I was in my life, I viewed what had transpired with the sexual assault as my fault.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was, I was operating in that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So when we got back to, day-to-day life, and he approached me a few days later with the situation, I was like, okay, let me help you. You said you'd pay me back. And, he did actually send me, and he did this so well. I think he waited a few weeks before he said, well, let's do like $300 payments.
Okay.
So, I was like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, if that's what you can afford, I think
Mm-hmm.
that's reasonable. If you can't afford to give me it all up front. And so he sent me a couple of those $300 payments.
Okay. So at this point, your boyfriend and girlfriend.
That's how I
Are you talking about
perceived
the
it.
future at all, or?
He definitely would bring up the fact that he wanted to marry me.
Okay.
That he was, as soon as he got a job, he was gonna get a place and like we could like make a life and it would be so perfect. And I was like, so and it's
And were you falling for him at this point?
I think I
Yeah.
was I think it was more of I was falling in love with the idea
Right.
of who this person was or could be,
Mm-hmm.
even though all of these subconscious red flags were going off.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, but what if I'm wrong?
Right. Right.
What if he is this nice guy? What if he doesn't mean to do those things? What if he is, this Prince Charming?
Right. Yeah.
Because at times he would really convey himself to be that. And it was, it was hard because he was showing all the people around us that's who he was.
Right. Yeah. That's kind of a cognitive dissonance where you're having two different realities going on at the same time.
That's a good way to put it. Because that's exactly what was happening.
He was really trying to keep the relationship going.
I think so. I think because had he not approached me with that request for the car storage fees and the garage payments or the basically loan,
Right.
I would have probably come to the realization of what he did at the gathering. and broken things off.
Mm-hmm.
So, within a few days of him approaching me and us going into that, financial agreement
Right.
together, him,
That almost ties you in with him for a while.
it
Pay you back. Yeah.
it was looking that way. And he said, if I get this job, I can pay you back all
Right.
at once.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably not going to be that long, but for
Mm-hmm.
now, can we just, for the couple of months while I'm between jobs, can I um, pay you in this amount? And I said,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's fine. And I'm believing him that
Right.
he's
Of
going to get
course.
this job and he's going to pay me all back, and then I can, kind of
Mm-hmm.
end it, because I was already considering it
Mm-hmm.
at that point, of
Right.
course,
Of course. It makes sense.
and kind of oscillating between that fantasy and the
Mm-hmm.
reality. I think he sensed that. I
Mm-hmm.
think he sensed that, the time was limited, where I would, there was a 50-50 chance I was going to land on the reality.
Right. Of course. He's trying to keep you from that reality.
hmm So we continued to see each other.
Okay.
I think 1 or 2 dates after I loaned him that money
Mm-hmm.
and went into that agreement,
Mm-hmm.
he invited me to cook dinner at his place.
Okay.
And I had never been to his place before.
Okay. So you're like
And
excited to see like where he
like,
lives and
yeah, where's it,
yeah.
what is this man, about,
Yeah.
And so I went to the building that he lived in. It was like this really old, like vintage style loft in San Diego. And so
Was it close to your
it
house?
was very
Oh,
close.
okay. Yeah.
I mean, we're talking less than 3 blocks.
Oh, wow.
And I get inside, and it's a very interesting setting. What really stood out to me was that all of the belongings were in boxes, like he was moving
Or had just moved in?
or had just moved in, but it was like kind of dirty.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh my goodness, like this is what's going on here. He goes, well, I'm in the process of moving.
Oh, okay.
And I
Moving with
was,
you?
probably wanted to find an opportunity to do
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of looking around and seeing these boxes, and I was like, okay, is there space for us to make this meal? Do you have a
Yeah.
kitchen that works? And
Was the kitchen clean?
is the kitchen clean? It's actually not. So I'm like, okay, can we let's get this ready, because we're just gonna make a quick, simple dinner, and have
So
an
you have to clean up first.
and we're cleaning up and we're moving boxes and we're shuffling around. And then this elderly dog, I remember there was this elderly pit bull dog, came limping out of the room, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't know you had a dog. And so I meet this dog and I'm like, wow, like I didn't realize like this is your dog. Like I
Uh-huh.
had never seen him before.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, oh yeah. And we make the dinner, and I remember having to he was like, I want you to read something. This was so odd, but I think it's important that I mention
Okay.
this. And he said, after the meal, he said, well, we're waiting for, because I think we had to put it in the oven.
Right.
He said, while we're waiting for that to finish, I want you to read this manuscript I'm writing for a TV show.
Oh, gosh.
And I'm like, a manuscript? Like,
Mm.
what is that? Like, I
Uh-huh.
don't know. Like, what is okay?
Okay.
So he sits me in front of this like old desk with all this junk on it, and there's
Uh-huh.
this laptop, and he's like, here, let me pull it up. And it's this like really wordy document, and it's really graphic, like erotic, like, and I'm just like, at this point, I'm like, this is so weird.
Uh-huh.
Like, why are you having me read this?
Yeah.
And I was like, kind of skimming through it, pretending like I'm a fast reader. I mean, I
Uh-huh.
am a relatively fast
Right.
reader,
Yeah.
but I was like,
Mm-hmm. Trying to get over with.
this is just weird.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm done. He's like,
Uh-huh.
what did you think? And I was like, I don't really know what kind of feedback to give you, because
Right.
I'm not, I'm not a professional. I'm not in this industry. So,
Right.
I told him, I said, maybe getting a second opinion with somebody who has more experience would be more helpful.
Right.
And he just looked so disappointed,
Aw.
because I think like after that first scene that had been written out was like so like weird, gory, erotic. I was like,
Mhm.
this is weird. Like, who is this guy? But I'm a
Well,
creative.
he probably thought you were going to be impressed.
Impressed, or reflective of some of the points you've been bringing up, maybe he was just testing my boundaries to see how sexually comfortable I was with violence integrated with intercourse. And I was like, not. And I was just like, but I'm a creative.
Right.
I understand that, part of being an artist is to express yourself authentically and unapologetically.
Yeah, true.
And so I saw this, okay, he does this he's a writer, or he's an aspiring writer. This is his art. It's not my cup of tea. But
Did you know he was a writer prior to that? Never brought that up either.
This whole experience took a really tragic turn of events, because after dinner, I had said, doesn't your dog need to, because I've owned dogs before. I know if they're indoors, they have to go outside to, do their business. And so I said, do you ever walk your dog? It's been a couple hours. Should we take him for a walk? And I thought maybe this would be a good time for me to leave. I was like, maybe I can just walk home and you can, go about your night. And so we take the dog for a walk, and the dog is an elderly dog and, has to be carried up and down the stairs. So he's like, can you help me carry him back upstairs? And I'm like, oh, okay. So I guess I'm not going home quite yet. So I carried the dog upstairs with him. And then I remember what was odd was that he locked the door behind us as we were going in. And this is the first time I've been to his place. I'm already off put. It's not put together. It looks like a old abandoned house attic. It's dusty, it's dirty, there's boxes everywhere. It smells like the poor dog has been in there for days. I'm like, this is very weird. And I'm not one to pass too much judgment on living conditions. I know mental health and contributing factors can play a role in how that environment looks.
Right.
But I just felt, I had dinner. I spoke with him. It was like the date time was kind of for me over.
Oh, yeah.
And when he locked the door, he said, "Oh, you haven't seen my room yet. Let's go to my room. I have some really cool things I want to actually get your opinion on." And I'm like, okay. And it's a 1 bedroom, 1 bath. So it's not very far to the bedroom. I follow him into the room, and he has this collection of like crystals and feathers. And, I'm like, wow, like, okay, this is pretty interesting. It just looks like a new age, crystal shop or something. And he's like asking me about these different stones. And I said, I'm not a geologist.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know these things. Again, you might want to ask somebody else. And then I remember he goes, "You look so beautiful." And I had my bag, like I was ready to leave. I had been ready to leave since we walked the dog. And he goes, "You can put your bag down here. You look so beautiful." Then he starts like kissing my neck and feeling me up. And I'm like, we haven't been intimate since that happened at the location. So I'm like, okay, maybe he's just trying to have a romantic, you know, evening and ending with this, and so I consented, to that, and, undressed. And after a prolonged period of time, I remember feeling like this is okay. I'm good.
Right.
I'm done. Like this has
Yeah.
concluded the intimacy component of the evening. I'm good.
Yeah.
And I had been wanting to go for hours at this point. And I wanted to go home. I had work to do in the morning. It was late and I was exhausted. And I just remember him holding me down. And I was like completely undressed. And I'm like, well, I have to go get my clothes. And he's like basically holding me in a position where I'm again on my back, unable to move. And every time I tried to kind of position myself to get off the bed in his bedroom, he would put me back down. And I was like, you know, I'm not, this isn't, that's enough. I think I said that. That's enough. I just remember I was like, okay, he's going to want to have his way with me more. So I just kind of did what I've always done, which is completely submit. And a part of me was trying to reason with him, and I was speaking to him. And the scariest thing about this situation was that he didn't say anything, just like what happened before. He almost had like this blank expression, and he had no words. And I remember, he had my legs down at this point. His hands, he was putting his weight on my legs. I was on my back, and I said, okay, I really need to go. And he at this point, I thought he was going to let me leave. And I was like, okay. And then he pulls out these like metal chains from under his bed in this like steel toolbox. And I'm like, what is this person into? And I just remember hearing in my head, don't let him put those on you. Because I could smell the metal. Those were real. And when one of them fell, I remember it was on my left side. One of them fell. I could feel how heavy it was. And I'm like, I'll do whatever you want. Just don't put those on me. I do not want those on me. We'll do whatever you want. And he proceeded to assault me for hours. Hours. I was at this point delirious. I remember all I could see was that dog in the corner. And I was just like, I'm staying connected with you because this is horrifying, confusing, and just a nightmare. And I was like, I have to leave. And so I just held on to that connection with the dog in the corner. Eventually, it came to a conclusion on his terms. And I was like, okay, I'm out of here. Have a good night. And I walked home at like 2 a.m. I was confused. Was that romantic? Is that what is expected? I mean, granted, I hadn't been intimate with someone in years. I didn't know if that was what people were doing. I just remember going home and taking the longest shower. And I was like, I had one cat at the time. And I just remember laying in bed, just kind of disassociating and falling asleep with him, my little cat. And the next day, I woke up and I hadn't heard from him. And usually he's like sending me text messages, like 5, 10 text messages, like all the time during the day. And I hadn't heard from him in like hours. And I'm like, I wonder what happened. Because the whole time we've been involved in each other's lives, he's been like Velcro to me as much as he could. And then I finally hear from him. It's like in the late afternoon, early evening. And he said, can I come over? And I said, yeah, we actually need to talk. And he comes to my apartment and yeah. I want to thank you for holding that space, Lisa. You're feeling what I'm not allowing myself to feel right now. And I'm grateful for what you're doing because it's not easy.
I'm so sorry. It's not easy. No.
I think it's easier for me to be angry than sad. So I want to just acknowledge that what you're feeling is
oh, someone listening to it, it's terrible. It's brutal. It's not your fault.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And yeah, so he comes over and I sit him down. I said, do you want some coffee? Do you want some water? I'm still like defaulting to autopilot me. And, he's like, oh, yeah, sure, I'll take some coffee or whatever. And I sit him down at the table and I say, listen, I know that you still plan on making these payments and we can agree to have that taken care of as soon as possible. But we need to talk about what you did. And he goes, what did I do? I said, well, last time we were intimate, I told you to stop. I told you that that was enough. And you continued to be sexual with me. And he goes, well, isn't that what women like? Weren't you just in the moment? Wasn't that? I said, no. I don't know what kind of women you're used to being with, but that is not what no means in my vocabulary. If that is ever communicated during intimacy, physical intimacy, be that intercourse, kissing, hugging, anything, you have to respect that. And at that point, it isn't consensual. And you continue to coerce yourself onto me or force me to do something I wasn't comfortable with. And I remember looking at him in the eye and saying, you're an abuser. You're my abuser. And he was so angry. He lost it. Well, you said you would do anything I wanted. How dare you? I can't believe this. I don't need this. How could you lead me on? And I said, you know what? You need to leave. And I don't ever want to see you again. I don't ever want to see you again. And
wow.
It was like he left, but
Wow,
then
that was so brave of you. How did you feel safe to say that?
I call these acts of divine intervention.
Wow.
I believe that
you basically told him that he raped you. You didn't consent.
I looked at
You're
him
an
in the
abuser.
eyes. And I rephrased it and I said, you're my abuser.
Wow.
And he could not even, and at that point I had already been oscillating between this guy's a total fraud. I mean, he was lying about everything, not just his indigeneity or his tribal affiliation. He was lying about his career. He was lying about his former relationships. He was lying about his current relationships. I was like finding things left and right, trying to hold him accountable. Each time he would weasel his way out. But this time I'm like, there's no way you're convincing me that that was not assault.
Even his living space.
Oh, it was horrific. It was like a horror movie.
Yeah, that's scary.
Quite literally.
And can we talk about the chains? I mean, that's why I started crying, because like, what the heck was he going to do with those chains?
I remember it took me months to share this experience with anybody. But when I finally told a close friend of mine, she asked me if I thought that this person was involved in human trafficking. And that could very well be the case.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to answer her. But, going back, I didn't tell people because this person started to call me every day after I ended things. After I told him I wanted nothing to do with him, he would text me every day. He would call me. He would leave things at my door. Flowers, cards.
I was going to ask you, is it loving or hateful?
I think it was hateful, but it appeared to be loving.
Right.
I think everything about these types of predators is hateful.
In disguise.
And they disguise it as loving.
Yeah, they hate women.
For whatever reason, they hate themselves.
Yeah.
and they project that onto the people that they feel like they can get away with it. So this man was, leaving things at my door. I work from home, so I would leave to go to the gym, I would leave to do errands, and I would see these flowers, I would see these cards, and immediately throw them away. I don't want anything to do with this person.
It's almost like stalking you, like knowing where you are.
It was stalking.
Mm-hmm.
It was stalking because I remember I was invited to teach an online class. And I think the social media platforms for the organization that hired me to do it was advertising. They had a pretty big following. And this person came across it, even though he, was blocked on all forms of communication on my end. He had come across that and this is months later. This is like maybe 2 months later after I had ended things, because that was in late August, early September. This was early November, and over the course of those 2 months, he was leaving things at my door. He was texting me. He was calling me.
So he has to be watching you to know when you're not there to leave things. That's the thing with social media. Like a lot of times you don't have to post in real time, but if you're at an event, he knows exactly where you are.
It's absolutely true. And I have since been trying to implement more mindful practices when it comes to my activity in real life versus the virtual landscape, because that is absolutely something that people are experiencing, is posting in real time. Even texting certain phone numbers or using certain platforms to text, people can geographically locate you just based on your mobile device.
Yeah, no, it's pretty scary. That's one thing I always say to people: never post in real time. For me, it's always like hours later or days later.
Yeah, and I love that practice, and it has taken me. I mean, I didn't grow up with social media so much, not to age myself, but that was a relatively new practice. I didn't have social media until I was 21.
Right.
So I wasn't aware of this, but I became aware of it. Here's where I was, and I still identify somewhat in this mind space. While there is always a possibility, I don't want to assume that that's how it's going to be utilized. Technology is an objective tool.
Right.
How it is used is a direct reflection of the individual who's using it.
Absolutely.
I like to use the metaphor of a house and a hammer. You could build a house with a hammer, or you can destroy it. That's up to the person that utilizes the hammer. It's not up to the hammer. So with the technology component, and you acknowledging that, that's very likely. That is very likely. And I, I remember that night of the class, I saw him, actually caught him in the act. I had come back from a run, and I was coming down the way that the foyer in my building is, where my apartment is located. There's this long hallway before I reach my door. So I'm at the end of the hallway, and I see him in a distance at my door leaving something. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm catching him in the act. And I live in a secure building.
Right.
You need a fob to even come through the main entrance. You need a fob to enter the garage. He was breaking in each time he decided to do something like that. And so I confronted him and I said, you need to leave. And you need to take whatever you're leaving with you, because I don't want it. And he's like, I'm so sorry. I've just been trying to reach you. You're not answering my calls, and I don't know if I'm blocked. I just wanted a way to apologize for everything. And I'm like, I don't want to hear it. And I'm a compassionate person. I said, I'm not at that point in my life where I can look back at this and be okay with it. I'm far from that. So you need to go. And you need to take this, what you're leaving here, and you need to stop leaving it. I don't keep any of them. Whatever gifts you leave, I don't keep them. I don't want them. So you should take this too. And that's when his mask fell off again, and that anger, when I wasn't accepting his apology and I stuck with,
Mm-hmm.
you need to leave. You need to take this with you. And he was like, you're going to read this. And he had this like note card in an envelope. And I remember him shoving it in my face. And I said, don't you dare do that to me. I said, I don't want to read it.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, no, you're going to read it. And he almost had like tears in his eyes. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm at this point, I'm like waiting for one of my neighbors to open their door because I live in a high rise. So I'm like, somebody's going to come out.
Right.
And I was like, okay, just I don't want to read it. I acknowledge that you have your feelings in there, but
Mm-hmm.
I remember he didn't even let me finish. He just shoved it under my door. And I
Mm-hmm.
have like the building has like these security doors, so
Mm-hmm.
he's like pushing it, trying to
Mm-hmm.
shove it underneath my door. And he's like, "You're going to read what I have to say." And I'm like, "Okay, you need to go now.
Okay.
I have things to do. I'll
Mm-hmm.
walk you to the elevator." Because in my mind, I'm thinking,
Mm-hmm.
I cannot show this person that I am afraid of him.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot show him that I am in a state of chaos.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm going through internally, I cannot reflect that
Mm-hmm.
externally.
That's
And
smart. Mm-hmm.
I just knew somewhere in me knew to do that
Mm-hmm.
instinctually. So I remember I said, well, okay, we'll just calm down.
Yeah, good thing you didn't open your door.
I didn't.
Yeah, I know you waited till he left.
And I stayed a distance. He tried multiple times to
Mm-hmm.
come towards me and I kept backing
Mm-hmm.
away. And I said, don't, like he tried to put his hands on me, try to hug me, touch me, whatever, pull me in. I said, no, we're not doing that. You need to go. I said, I'll walk you to the elevator.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, I'm like, I'm running late.
Mm-hmm.
And he's walking in front of me in the building in the foyer towards the elevator bank. And he's trying to walk next to me. He keeps slowing down to try to be next to me. And I'm like, oh, you're not, I don't want anything to do with you. I just said, let's keep going. Let's keep going. And when we reach the elevator bank, the elevators are kind of kitty corner to where the foyer ends into like a larger lobby. I remember him turning around. This happened so quick. It happened so quick. He turned around and grabbed me and wrapped me in this bear hug. So like his arms were like this. I remember because he was quite a bit taller than me. Um, his hands were like here. I was like I couldn't breathe,
Mm-hmm.
and I just remember hearing in my head, "Keep your knees locked. Don't collapse. Don't faint. Don't collapse. Keep your knees locked."
Mm-hmm.
And I remember locking my knees so I stood straight vertical. And then I heard the elevator ding, and he let go immediately and didn't say a single word. He didn't say anything. It was so repulsive. I was like, I remember breathing, gasping for the air because it felt like he held me like that for a long time. I'm sure it was only a few seconds.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how long it was in linear time, but it felt like forever. And I said, don't you ever fucking come here. I don't ever want to see you again. And I saw the doors close and he didn't say a single word. And I was like, oh my gosh, this class starts in like 5 minutes. I haven't showered or anything. So I get back into my apartment and I go through with the class. Luckily, it was virtual. So I was, able to mostly facilitate, you know, it was, I don't think anybody even realized, could have had any idea what I just went through.
No, of course not. Did you read the letter that he dropped off?
I
Did
actually
you
ended
to
up
see what it says?
I actually ended up opening it, and I don't think it even said anything meaningful.
Oh, okay.
It was like a pre-written card or something.
I didn't know if it was something you could use. Like,
It,
did
it,
you go to the cops?
so
File
I,
assault?
I remember after the class, I
Okay.
texted my therapist,
Mm-hmm.
and she said, I said, I need to talk to you. Do you have any availability? Sooner the better. She saw me the next day or within the next 2 days, and I spoke to her about what occurred, and she said, you need to call the police.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I thought so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I called them, and they came, they took the report.
Good.
And their line of questioning, I was very fortunate that the officers who arrived had the line of questioning they did, because it allowed me to describe the series of events you and I have discussed here
Mm-hmm.
today, and they confirmed that I had been assaulted
Mm-hmm.
and that this person was a criminal,
Mm-hmm.
not just for stalking me,
Mm-hmm.
not just for harassing me and physically assaulting me in my building,
Mm-hmm.
like unwanted contact. It was sexual assault.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that reality hit me.
Yeah.
The one that I had been oscillating between the fantasy and the reality. And I just remember one of the officers said, I need to go. Does your building have like a management office or a leasing office, or, place where I can speak to someone about the security and the CCTV? So one of the officers left, and I was left with the other officer. And I remember he was a younger gentleman, and he was looking at my artwork. My apartment's full of my work. And then he just said, these are beautiful. And I just want to let you know what you're doing is so important.
Mm.
What you've described to us, this is probably not this person's first time doing it.
Mm.
And he's going to continue to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're doing is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not your fault.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember in my head, I was like, he's reading off a script. Like, what is, who are you? Like, stranger in my house.
Right.
Like,
But so good that when they say that, though, to feel like you at least have that support there with you.
in retrospect,
Yeah.
I'm so grateful he said it, because when I was recounting and answering their line of questioning, I couldn't allow myself to really emotionally take on what I had been repressing this whole
Right.
time for these months, these ongoing months. I mean, this is over the course of 4 months, at this point.
Well, it escalated really quickly.
It was very quick.
Yeah.
It was very short-lived. And
do you think he was trying to kill you when he grabbed you and you couldn't breathe? Or when you're so angry and his eyes turn black, anything could happen.
I think he was trying to show me that he could kill me.
Oh, God, that's so scary.
I don't think he would have done it like in that setting, but I think he was trying to show me that I had no control over what he could and would do. That he was in control. And I'm so grateful that I had the strength given to me.
Yes.
When I did, because I felt like I was going to pass out. Like I said, I don't even know how long it felt like ages before that elevator came up. And I'm sure it happened very quickly, but in that moment, it felt like forever.
Right.
And
you have a lot of strength that I think that he actually saw in you.
Thank you.
You weren't this vulnerable girl anymore who was submitting to him, and you were like, no, not anymore. Get out. Leave me alone.
Thank you.
Those are the things that's so hard for women to stand up and say and do. It makes us more vulnerable and keeps them more in charge and more in power. But it's like you took your power back, and he could feel it.
It was a desperate attempt to reassert dominance.
Looking back, and filing the police report also.
Oh, yeah.
Because now, paper trail.
Thank goodness. But as you and I both know, the legal system is so limited on what they can do in those moments to protect you. And so I soon came to realize that very quickly.
Well, the police let you know something about his heritage, right? Once they did some research on him.
So
what did you learn?
When you actually file a police report, they actually automatically, they ask you the the demographic information, right? So like age,
right.
What do you know? Well, in the past, we had a conversation. This was months before. I have a pretty good memory. I wouldn't say it's eidetic, but it's pretty close to that.
Right.
And I remember one of the times I had asked him about his tribal affiliation, he had told me that he ripped up his membership card. So we each are given like what is like a social security card, because our tribal ID number is the equivalent of a social security number for our sovereign nation.
Okay.
And so we have these identifications, our tribal IDs is what we call them. And they have our demographic information. It's like a driver's license. It's made out of plastic. So I'm like, why would he say that he ripped it up? It's plastic. So I remember when he went to use the restroom, I looked through his wallet. He had left like his wallet and keys on the table or somewhere, and I just remember looking at his driver's license, and I saw one, he had lied about his age. He was 10 years senior to what he informed me his age
What?
was, and that
Wait, he's 10 years older than what he told you?
he told me he was 44 at the time. I looked at his driver's license, and it said 1970.
So he was 54.
He was 54.
Wow. That's a big difference.
And I was like, okay. And then his name didn't match, because he goes by one name, and then the name on his driver's license, which was a California driver's license, was different. And I just remember, I don't think I got to look further into it, like, but I do remember seeing those two things. So I gave the cops that. Oh, and I remember the spelling of his middle name. It was this weird, like, name. And I remember him on one of our dates talking about his middle name, and that it meant gift of God or something like that. So it really stuck to me when I saw it. So the police were able to pull him up in their system, which they already had him in.
Wow.
And I was like, holy crap, I don't know what for. But
they never told you what for?
But they said, well, it looks like he's in our system. We don't know if the name that you gave us is his real name. It could be a fake name, because if I were to say it, you would say that sounds like a fake name.
Oh, yeah.
And
was he even Native American?
The police told me that he was born in the Philippines and that he was Caucasian and Filipino.
What?
And I was like, yeah, that makes sense, because nothing I asked him about his heritage added up ever. And when I would ask a lot more on our dates and during the time we spent together, he would just give me these really outrageous responses. And I was very not surprised. And I was like, well, at this point, and I just want to clarify, it doesn't matter where you're from.
Well, he wasn't what he was saying he was.
We are all human beings.
Right.
We are all deserving of living a life that is a gift and that is a blessing. And I'm not here to call this person out on their false portrayal of indigeneity, because if I'm going by the teachings of the elders in my life, we are all Indigenous. Our ancestors are Indigenous from different locations of the world.
Right.
But it's his behavior and how he weaponized everything, from the stories to his heritage to infiltrate my community. I think that's what I'm calling out more so.
Yeah, I could see that. It's extremely deceptive.
It's disturbing. I mean, okay, you're not Native. That's disturbing. A lot of people do, feel like they can claim in Native descendantry. I hear it all the time. And that very well may be true.
Yeah.
Our people have been displaced over the course of this country establishment. You may very well have, 1/16 Cherokee, but
true.
This person was completely dishonest.
Yeah, completely.
And on top of that, more importantly, he was a criminal. He had financially been dishonest. He had assaulted me in every way that you could think of. And I that's the more important matter, is that this person, I don't care if you're 100% Native American Indian, you don't belong in our community if you're acting that way.
No.
And that's really what I emphasized. So after months of therapy, after I filed the police report, me and my therapist, I said, we were talking about things, and here's what came up. And she goes, yeah, I was suspecting that
Mm-hmm.
while we would have our sessions.
Oh,
While we
really?
were involved. She goes, I suspected, something like that was transpiring. And I went into, to detail about how bad it was, and she said, wow, this is serious, and you did what you need to do, and now you need to get a restraining order.
Good.
So and it was a huge inconvenience. It's
Of
always
course.
an inconvenience on the survivor. We have to jump through these legal hoops of the judicial
Yeah,
systems.
it's exhaustive.
And if you're not knowledgeable of these systems and how they operate and which forms to fill out, or if you don't have volunteers or attorneys or resources financially or even physically to afford that,
Right.
um, you can't get a restraining order. So I spent all day in court. The judge, no question, it was courthouse had already closed, and I was still waiting to hear from the docket and for them to bring it out. And they said, you have your emergency restraining order.
Good.
So now we have to serve him with this, complaint.
It was the hardest part.
And that was the hardest part because I wasn't willing to do it, and I wasn't willing to put anybody I knew in that situation to serve this person. And at that point, I think this person was homeless. I think he was like living in his car, looking back at all the text messages. He was saying he was in some sort of shelter. So I gave the sheriffs that address, and it took him a while to find him because, again, we don't even know if this individual is using the right name, the legal name, or if it's a fake name, fake identity. So
Gosh,
that
that's
was
so scary.
it was really
It's even scarier to find out who this person is.
I was not surprised at this point. It totally aligned with everything I had experienced with this person.
Where are you at in your healing journey now?
I saw this opportunity to go back and recount this series of events as a proverbial nail in the coffin. It's been years since I went through this, which isn't a long time, but it has allowed me to inform people in my community. It's allowed me to seek protection from the legal system that I needed to do. And I've processed the events to the point where I am not desensitized, but I have accepted the reality of what the situation is.
Yeah.
But I feel like with the guidance of the elders in my life and in my community, they have empowered me to use this to see the bigger picture, which is that this story is not uncommon in my community, and it's not uncommon in a lot of demographics, a lot of communities that live in a state of oppression because of the systems that are in place to keep them there. This is a very common story. And I'm very lucky to be here, that I have my life, because a lot of women aren't so lucky.
Right.
And they cannot speak about these events, to protect the community. I was talking to a really good friend recently, and she's a very insightful, very brilliant woman. And she told me, she said, Chiffon, I don't think that women gossip just to speak, just to hear words. And it's not used to just process things. It's actually a primitive way that we keep ourselves safe.
That's interesting.
That sharing these things that we experience with other women and men, if they're willing to listen to us. It's a way to bring awareness to the intricacies of the behaviors that can lead to these devastating events.
Right. Yeah.
It's instinctual.
Yeah. And a lot of times you don't even know that it's happened to you until you hear the stories of others. And so you can actually define it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, I'm very blessed to have the people in my life that I have.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like you have a really good community support.
I would like to think so. I've been very blessed. I believe that people are sent into our life for a reason. And I can fall to my knees in gratitude with the people that have been placed on my path and have been willing to help me through this. And, I feel very grateful for that. Absolutely.
I'm just curious, what kind of practices and rituals are you doing to love yourself and protect yourself?
Well, I'm an artist. I'm a visual artist. I'm a painter. I'm an illustrator. One of the places that I have had the most healing occur is within the natural environment. In our culture, we believe that all life is sacred and we are all interconnected, and that place is where we belong as living creatures, as living beings. And the most unconditional love that I've ever experienced in my life has not come from human beings. It's come from the natural world. And so that is, my practice is to honor that, those teachings, those living creatures, those four-leggeds, those winged ones, those water beings, those rocks, the trees, the holy plant people. They are our medicine.
So true.
And in our creation stories, we learned how to live in harmony and to walk on this earth from them.
Right.
We were the last to emerge from the center of the earth. All of the living creatures had walked the surface of the earth for time immemorial before us. We learned how to be because of them. And for me, I see what is happening to the earth. I see what is happening to the natural environment, and the fact that we are reaching a state of crisis for our natural environment, not just on native land, which is the Americas, but throughout the globe. And
it's a global crisis.
It is.
And a lot of people don't realize how much healing comes from just being, like you said, in nature. Like for me, being out by the sea or taking hikes. I always encourage people to do that more often.
Absolutely. Because it is within these spirits that we see the potential of who we are. It is through those experiences that we learn how to be, even still today. And one of my favorite quotes is from a book by Rainn Wilson, Soul Pancake, and he wrote, "There is no difference between art and prayer." And that is so true for me, because in those moments of me as a practicing artist, and for me to convey the elements of the natural world within the other species that I share this planet with, and hold reverence in them, I am in a state that connects me to the divine uninhibitedly. And that's where the real healing happens.
Right.
It's when you surrender to that and realize this is the bigger picture.
It is the bigger picture. That's also where I think you got a lot of your power from.
I will say that a lot of the wisdom that I've been asked to share with people over the course of my life hasn't always come from humans. much of it, if not most of it, comes from the other species.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from the bodies of water.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from the mountains.
Yeah.
You know, as Apache people, we believe in the spirits of our mountains,
Mm-hmm.
that they are our protectors.
Yeah, it's a powerful force.
They're sacred.
Mm-hmm.
They're part of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I practice that as an artist and as a woman, as a person, you know, and it's for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we are all of this earth.
Mm-hmm.
We are all part of the circle, and I think that until we remember that, the change that we need will not occur.
Right.
So that practice has been
It
huge.
also brings you back to who you are.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So
I did mention therapy too, so do you want to be a big proponent of that? You know, in my culture, it's not embraced.
Oh no.
You know, less than common. You know, it's starting to be more spoken about, but you know, having a therapist has been life-changing for me, especially finding one of Indigenous descent too. You know, that has been a game changer for me. And so I'm a huge proponent of building your community with people who have dedicated their life and aligned themselves with their purpose to support you in that. And so I definitely want to openly speak on that and say that's a huge part of my healing. And in addition to, you know, my community and our traditions as well.
When you hear the powerful statement, from now on, how would you end that sentence?
From now on, I will execute my right to honor myself first so that I can honor my community.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. You're a very strong woman. I think you're stronger than you know.
Thank you. I really appreciate
Yes,
that. I appreciate that very much. You know, it's important.
Yeah.
I always tell people what you see in me is a reflection of what is in you.
Oh, wow.
And so I hope you you receive that.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
This is From Now On. I'm Lisa Phillips. Until next time, stay informed, stay empowered, and remember there is strength in speaking out. And special thanks to our amazing guest, Chiffon Lark. Elizabeth Wyndham is our senior producer, Christopher Leon is the editor, and Jose Oriana is our studio producer. Our theme music is Many Worlds by Memory Theory. If you have any thoughts, questions, or stories about your own views on topics discussed on From Now On, email us at fromnowonpod@gmail.com. And please follow, rate, comment, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. If today's conversation resonated with you and you are seeking more support in your own healing journey, if you or someone you know has been sexually assaulted, help is available. Call 800-656-HOPE. If you or someone you know is being trafficked, contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Text 233-733. That's Be Free. PAVE is a 501c3 nonprofit creating a world free from sexual violence and building communities to support survivors. To learn more, go to shatteringthesilence.org. Speak Out, Act, Reclaim, SOAR, is dedicated to providing a safe and empowering space for survivors of sex trafficking to reclaim their stories and stand up for themselves and each other. That's www.speakoutactreclaim.org.